Hi, and welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by...
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza-Rimas, marriage and family therapist.
We are all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of the Ardent Counseling Center in Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms. And today we are being joined by Capes on the Couch. It is a podcast that does a similar thing to what we do, which is they talk about comic book characters in the context of psychology. So if they would introduce themselves...
All right. I'm Dr. Issues. Yes, I do have a real name, but I don't use it for the podcast. But I am a board-certified psychiatrist actively practicing in emergency settings.
And I'm Anthony Sytko. I am not a therapist or any trained mental health professional. I am an attorney and a longtime comic book aficionado. And I have a radio background, so that's kind of why Doc and I started the show, to sort of destigmatize mental health. And we thought that using comic books would be a good way to do it, since they are so pervasive in the cultural zeitgeist. It's a good way to get people to think about issues that they might not otherwise have considered.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And is there anything you want to plug up front about where people can find you?
Sure, yeah. You can check out our website, capesonthecouch.live. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/capesonthecouch, where you can subscribe at various levels to obtain additional benefits of the show, bloopers, early access, uncensored material. We are available on pretty much every major podcasting platform, and our email address is capesonthecouch@gmail.com. So we love to hear from our fans. And just before we go any further, thank you so much, Popcorn Psych, for having us on. We definitely appreciate it. And you guys did a great job on our episode, and we're welcome to, and we're happy to return the favor.
Yep, totally happy to be here.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much. We're really happy to have you guys. This is our first time having anybody guest with us, and we're honored that it's you guys.
Yeah, for real. And so I guess we should say, too, that we just recorded an episode with you guys over the same topic. So today we're going to be talking about the Hulk. So on your podcast, because it's comic book oriented.
Incredible Hulk.
Well, we just talked about them, the Hulk.
Oh, yeah, right.
On their podcast. Benjamin,
I'm sorry. Hulk is such a bad movie. It just makes my skin crawl.
So on their podcast, we talk about the entity, the character that is the Hulk in total. And in this podcast, if you would let me finish, we're going to be talking about just the movie Incredible Hulk, which is how I know it as the Ed Norton version that came out in 2007. Unfortunately, my favorite Hulk, Mr. Mark Ruffalo.
Yes.
It does not have his own movie. If someone wanted to do a super cut of just his parts in movies, in the Marvel movies, and make them into one, I would watch it.
Yeah.
100%.
Brittany considers Mark Ruffalo a zaddy, just so you all have background
who
on this.
doesn't, dude?
Yeah, who doesn't? I totally agree with that
Also,
statement.
great use of the word zaddy.
I learned something
good,
from you
Ben.
guys.
That's impressive, though.
So I'll give a quick rundown of Incredible Hulk, because we're kind of going to be talking about him sort of in the vacuum of that movie a little bit. But if you guys over at Capes on the Couch want to add context for the Hulk universe, bring it on. And because also we might touch upon the Mark Ruffalo version as well, because I think that's the most popular version, or the most well-known now.
Yeah,
there's the Eric Bana
Edward
one.
Norton
which
was only in the one movie.
Yeah.
Ever since then, it's been Ruffalo. So
yeah. And I guess the general consensus is we don't speak of the Bana one, the actual Hulk titled movie. So I guess we're gonna pretend like that one doesn't exist.
What?
So in
As long as this reference is terrible any time before
The
or
Eric
after the word
Bana.
is mentioned, then we are okay.
Well, I mean, it's not canon within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and even to some extent, the Incredible Hulk film with Edward Norton is considered almost the bastard stepchild of the MCU, because it was very early on. It was only the second MCU film, and because Edward Norton hasn't reappeared since then, really canonically, it's just sort of like, that stuff happened.
Right, yeah,
let's
that one
focus on
exists,
Ruffalo.
I guess. Yeah, Norton was good in it, but I think that he was such a pain in the ass to deal with that they went with Ruffalo, who he recommended.
Yeah.
Yep.
Ask Terrence Howard what it's like to be a pain in the ass, and then ask if see if they bring you back for a film.
Right.
So much money you lose. So in this movie where we meet the Hulk he's already become the Hulk. He already had the whole gamma radiation deal. He, because of the havoc he created as the Hulk initially by hurting his girlfriend, Liv Tyler, Betty Ross, he has kind of put himself into a self-exile. So when we meet him in this movie, he's living in
Brazil.
And seems like he's trying to get his shit together in terms of learning how to control the Hulk. And so in this film, in this podcast episode, we'll be discussing the physiological responses of anxiety. And by physiological, like your bodily responses to anxiety. We're going to be discussing dissociation / post-traumatic stress disorder, as in the context of being the Hulk. We're also going to discuss the isolation of being a superhero and the fear of hurting others and how that isolates. And then we're going to touch upon toxic masculinity, aggression, and how it's kind of displayed in this movie as a whole. So you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I think when we start talking about the physiological responses to anxiety and how it has a cyclical effect, what we mean by that is that when we're dealing with a client who has anxiety, such as Bruce Banner does, his anxiety is centered around multiple things, where he's got fear that people are chasing him, fear that he can turn into this rage monster, particularly in this iteration of him. He is definitely someone who has no control over the Hulk persona, and his responses to anxiety are shown as through his heart rate monitor, where the trigger to becoming Hulk is if his heart rate goes above 200 beats per minute, then he's too excited and he's likely to turn into the Hulk. So when we look at physiological responses to anxiety, we're talking about cortisol levels being raised. Sorry, I've been talking all day, so my brain's a little fried today. His cortisol levels are going to be raised, and he's going to have feel physical tension. His heart rate is going to go up. He's likely to experience sweating and have a feeling of nervousness. And since we have a psychiatrist with us, Doc, I'd like to tap you in here and hear your thoughts on what we might be seeing with Bruce Banner when he's experiencing anxiety from the medical standpoint.
Sure. I think you did an excellent job describing, what's going to trigger all of that in terms of, increased cortisol, also epinephrine, norepinephrine. Basically, I like to call it the entire endocrine chain. It basically means your body is going to prepare for the worst. So in that sense, you're also going to see sweating. You're going to see changes in terms of the things that we don't think about. Like if someone says you're scared shitless, when they say things like that, it really does affect your gut. And the whole point, though, it's kind of the opposite in the sense that, you're not going to evacuate your bowels or anything. The point is things get synced up the other way. Like it shuts it down. You don't want to have anything happen so that you could focus on whatever is going on. And you can, have that classic, as everyone calls it, the fight or flight response. It's one of those things where when you're experiencing it in the moment, it depends on what was triggering it or what was, what the catalyst was. But some people enjoy that feeling temporarily. Other people never want to experience it at all, and it can have a real negative consequence. It depends on what moment you're in. If you're getting excited for a great physical activity, or you're feeling pumped, all right. No problem. All the things that we described are actually pretty good. They're going to allow you to perform at your peak level. If it's more that someone is, about to attack you or threatening you, or you're in a hostile environment, then, you're clearly going to have the psychological response that it's a negative situation. But unfortunately, whatever you had happen, you're going to tie the two together. So in other words, the physiological and the psychological are going to end up being linked one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Which is where we generate a cyclical effect, because you'd have both the physical memory and the psychological memory, and if you start to get the physiological response, the psychological response will be activated in turn.
For sure. And how I kind of try to describe it, sort of what you're saying, is sometimes it can be a good feeling and sometimes it's a feeling that helps you, is when I talk to clients about it, because they'll be really like beleaguered about it. Like, why do I keep acting this way? Like, I don't need to be this anxious. Like, what the hell is going on with my body? I try to tell them, like, back when we were cavemen or whatever, like, that stressors helped you survive. Like, those stressors were, like, that bodily reaction was, like, evolution kept that in our genetics because those people that had those heightened responses were the ones who lived. And so that's, like, years of evolution and, like, you know, passed down trauma, if you believe in that as well, like, coming into your body now. And so it's a lot of telling your body, like, I don't need that right now, but I appreciate that you're trying to keep me safe by working me up and trying to keep me alive, but I don't need that level of, like, hypervigilance right now and heightened startle and all that stuff. And so trying to appreciate that about your body, that it's actually doing something that would have helped you survive at one point in humanity, and now you don't need that anymore. Or maybe you needed that when you were younger,
right? Because
you were in an abusive setting and it helped you survive for many years. And so, like you were saying too, it's connected to the psychological. So now that you're older, when something similar happens, your body kicks into gear in a way that was very beneficial to you at one point in your life. And so trying to disconnect those two things because you don't need to do that anymore. I know that's kind of different. Well, I don't know if it's kind of different because with Hulk, because one of the things we talked about more on your podcast is Hulk like a baby? Is he like a little kid? And so maybe he still feels like he needs it, and that's why he comes out in all these situations, is because in his mind, because he's very small still emotionally, is like, I need this to help me feel better. Like how kids scream and wail when they're younger because everything is next level. And so your anxiety is keeping you safe in those moments as well, or getting your needs met.
Yeah.
There's no nuance with little kids.
Well, I was going to say, and I know we talked about it, very briefly, I think, in our show, but it's something, the possibility is mentioned, and I don't know how much of it is brought up in the movie, certainly, but in the character's history throughout the comics and such, that is Bruce Banner an adrenaline junkie? Because does he get a rush and a thrill from that physical transformation of being the Hulk? Because going back to, sort of that physiological response and talking about all of the, as you said, the endocrine chain and that fight or flight, that adrenaline rush can be a thrill for some people. And I'm speaking from experience. I get a rush sometimes from putting myself in a situation where I may not necessarily be in like mortal danger, but I don't know exactly how things are going to end up. I don't know exactly how, what my physical condition is going to be at the end of it. But I think it's going to make for a great story, and it's going to be a fun experience. And so I will do things that are outside of my comfort zone on a fairly regular basis, or I try to get that, not to the extent that it could be, potentially damaging to my body, but just that rush, that thrill. I'm currently, as we're recording this, I'm wearing a shirt from a Tough Mudder. I have 17 of these shirts because I've done 17 Tough Mudder events. And Doc has done a number of them with me. I've gotten him into it as well. And it's just, there's something fun and thrilling, even though I've done as many of them as I have. I never quite know exactly how I'm going to do on a particular course or in a given obstacle. I would like to try skydiving. I would like to, do sorts of things. One friend of mine talks about doing the running with the bulls in Spain.
I talked about that too. I was in Spain and I didn't get the chance. Doggone it.
But
that country's bigger than you think.
But I think it's a good point you bring up, which I don't know if Bruce could be honest with himself about it, does he get something out of transforming into Hulk? And is that like a kind of like a subconscious resistance to change? Because some people do, because whatever you're comfortable with, even if it's misery too. And so sometimes people, the idea of letting go of that anxiety or that heightened response, like, is too much. They don't want to deal with it, and they're like, but I like this part of me because it's serviced me. And also it can be thrilling to have that high. Like, that's why people pick fights. I mean, he defends that girl in the factory, and I think part of that was because he thinks he's a good man and he sees someone in danger. But I also wonder if part of it's like Hulk wants to come out and play and maybe I can have him come out a little bit and get a little bit of the thrill.
Well, I don't think that when he was protecting the girl, it started out as anything Hulk related. It's just he saw her being, threatened, whatever, by the other factory workers, and he wanted to do the right thing. And unfortunately, they escalated it to a point where the Hulk had to come out, and particularly that first transformation, and especially the way Louis Leterrier, the director, shot it. That's a horror film. Like, you don't see the Hulk at first. He's hidden. It's in darkness. And the entire sequence is shot as though the Hulk is a monster. And they shot it like a monster film, and which from a cinematography standpoint, I certainly appreciate. But just, he's hidden. He's behind the things. The soldiers are in there. They're looking for him. He's on the hunt. And all of a sudden he comes bursting out. And you don't see him in full in that entire sequence until... you don't even really get to see him because it's all in shadows. You don't see the Hulk
It was
in
like
daylight.
Alien.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't see the Hulk in daylight until the attack at the university. That's when he bursts out of the bridge. That's the first time you see the Hulk in full. But that first attack sequence there is shot like a monster film. But back to the point, I don't think he went to save. I forget the girl's name.
I don't know if she had a name, to be honest.
That's probably not incorrect, and that's a whole other story. We'll get to.
We'll get to that later.
She has no agency, or she's just an object in the film. But the point is that he went to save her because it's the right thing to do. The other workers and then the soldiers escalated that to the point. So I don't know that he necessarily saved her because he wanted to be the Hulk.
Gotcha. Okay.
I feel like his transformation seems. The way that I saw it in the movie was painful. It looks painful when he switches. It does not look like it's something that, and I don't know, what that would be like. But I feel like so I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know if I cannot do
if the experience is positive.
If I don't know.
You can take those out while you talk.
Can I just take it out?
Yes.
Because I cannot fucking
Sorry,
do
we're
it.
we're all using like headphones and Skype and
we're hearing ourselves 3 times.
Yeah, I know.
And I can't. It's like making my brain scramble.
It is a little distracting. So for a little more delayed than usual, that's why. I think one part of the cyclical effect that we haven't touched upon with anxiety is sort of when we talk about panic attacks, which is like a lot of times what I hear from clients when they have a panic attack is that then the fear of having another panic attack is what causes a panic attack. And so I wonder if he has a similar situation as becoming the Hulk, where the fear of becoming the Hulk makes his heart race, because we touch upon this in your podcast, but he wears a heart, almost like an Apple Watch kind of thing in this movie, where that tracks his heart rate, and if it gets above 200, he hulks out. And so I wonder if, even though that can be helpful to as like a visual to say, oh, I'm getting up, I'm getting up there in heart rate, I need to take some deep breaths and chill out. I wonder also if in those moments when he's more heightened and all this stuff's going on, stimuli, people around him, if that pumps up his anxiety and brings on almost like a Hulk panic attack.
Well, I wonder if part of it is that. So when he does that, then my train of thought is out the window. I have no fucking idea what I'm talking about. Cool. Okay. So what I mean to say, and that I keep coming around to, is that the other thing that I feel like I talk a lot with people who struggle with anxiety is the connection to their body.
Yeah.
And how much sometimes people aren't connected to the things that are happening. What is happening in your body?
Yeah.
And because some people get heaviness in their chests. People get stomach aches, which we've kind of already talked about. And so I wonder if as he reaches 200, if it jumps from 200 to 250 really fast. Because once he gets to 200, then he's like, oh, fuck, I'm going to turn into the Hulk. And then that's what happens. So I wonder if once he gets to 200, he knows that he can't.
That's his point of no return.
Exactly. He can't control it. But I do agree with you that there is a chance, that having that, it may not be good.
It probably does.
Well, I think
he'd
start to see anxiety about the numbers. I think that is where the cyclical would come in. And why? Again, that's a core criteria of dealing with panic disorders. One of the core criteria has to be that part of the thing that you start panicking about is the panic itself. And anxiety and panic disorder don't always run together, but they frequently do, because the experience of anxiety, unless I'm incorrect, anxiety is a vasodilator type of symptom. So it's sending increased blood flow to the other parts of your body and getting you ready for fight or flight, whether it's I need to run or I need to fight or we need to freeze. One of those things is going to happen when you start getting to too extreme of anxiety. And panic is when your body goes into overload and you are shaking. And when he's afraid of this happening, that is not panic for him. It is Hulk, which is a whole extra level of problems, because now you're going from I might be not breathing or having trouble focusing or functioning at all. I might go into shutdown mode. I'm going to go into destroy everything mode. Any perceived threat is getting destroyed.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the reasons why, and this goes back to what Hannah's point was, with respect to the transformation being painful, and this is something that is, I'm going to bring up stuff that doesn't happen necessarily in the film itself, but his transformations as the Hulk change as he embraces the nature of the Hulk. In just the Edward Norton film, strictly within the Incredible Hulk, he never wants to turn into the Hulk. Aside from like maybe the fight against the Abomination where he realizes that he has to, but even then he doesn't really want to. But there's that beautiful moment in the Avengers film, and again, I'm bringing it outside, where, the Chitauri are coming around and Captain America says, I think might now be a good time for you to turn angry. And he goes, that's my secret, Cap. I'm always angry. And in that moment, it is a fluid transformation because he has accepted the nature of the beast and he just instantaneously turns into the Hulk. It's not this instance where he's fighting against it. I mean, even earlier in the Avengers, when that sequence with Natasha, where you can see he's trying not, because he doesn't want to do it, and then it's only after he talks to Harry Dean Stanton, after he fell out of the sky, and he's like, I have a better understanding of my nature. So back to that point, Hannah, I think that's why the transformation was painful initially for him, because he was fighting it, and to everyone else's point, that fear that shit, my pulse is like 195, I better get this down or everybody's going to be in trouble. He's fighting it. Later on, outside of the context of this film, he has a better understanding and control over the beast, so to speak.
Right. Just to kind of piggyback on that, part of anxiety in general, but especially with panic disorders, I like to tell to patients, it's the ultimate question of what if. What if I'm dying right now because of the physiological response I have? What if something is beyond my control? And in this case, he has direct evidence of it. So
it's huge evidence.
I mean, and that's what's so hard about his situation, and maybe as a therapist, what would be hard about what could be a real barrier to helping him is, how do you let go of something like this, where there is real life stressors and real life threats, and so it's not just he doesn't need it like you would generally do with the client. You'd be like, well, just tell your body you don't need it, trying to relearn this habit that your body's doing. But in this situation, he does need it sometimes, and he is a real reason to be panicked and to get worked up, and so it would be really hard in those situations, because you can't dispel that anxiety. It's a real thing.
And I feel like thinking about his physical response, and every time I take my ear thing out, my thought goes, I got nothing.
So I think we covered anxiety pretty well with Hulk. Like, when we talk about anxiety in general, one of the things that we haven't done that we normally do is talk about some of the general symptoms of what anxiety disorder even is. And I feel like that's probably an important thing that we can conclude for this part of the section before we start talking about dissociation and versus PTSD and how those two interact, because we talked a lot in this section about how anxiety and panic interact, and kind of covered how with Hulk, the treatment for panic, which we'll get into later, part of it is how do we work on calming you down and recognizing that you're not dying right now, whereas with Banner is you are literally going to turn into the Hulk if your heart rate crosses 200. So this is a whole different...
There is a real consequence.
Right, there's a real consequence. But as far as generalized anxiety disorder, there's some symptoms that go into it that we need to cover. And maybe we can roundtable on this one a little bit, but we're talking about having anxiety is basically described as apprehensive expectation, where you are feeling worried more often than not for 2 weeks at a time or more. You are having tension. You can have stomach issues. You can have irritability, difficulty focusing.
You can have like heart rate stuff, headaches, that kind of tension, trouble sleeping, excessive worries. I know racing thoughts isn't technically, I think, in the DSM, at least not anymore, but I think of it like that too, like kind of spiraled thinking.
Especially at night.
It has to be.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
It has to be
from personal
general
experience,
anxiety.
It definitely happens.
And it has to be general anxiety in that it has to be in more than one setting. So if it's just about work, you might not necessarily get the diagnosis, or if it's just about school or a relationship, it might be more adjustment disorder with anxiety about the specific thing that's stressing you out. But I think a good thing that we sort of touched upon here, which I think is the most not really understood, is the bodily reaction, where I've had multiple clients where they thought they had IBS. I mean, I guess they had IBS, but like they have like stomach problems for years, and they've gone to specialists for years, and then they finally go to a therapist and they work on their anxiety, and then they don't have stomach problems anymore, or they get chronic headaches, or they get like the heart stuff going, and they go to, I think a lot of times people go to medical doctors first and go maybe to multiple medical specialists for a while, and hopefully don't spend too much money, and then hopefully somebody along the line, usually like a primary care doctor or somebody, will eventually go, maybe you should see a therapist. And then they finally see a therapist and they're like, oh shit, this was all anxiety all along. Because I don't think we think of that. I know we talk a lot about how panic attacks can feel like heart attacks, and that's a common thing that I think a lot of people in the mainstream more know about, like people going to the ER thinking they're having a heart attack. They're really having a panic attack. But it's all the subtler things too. Like I said, IBS, chronic headaches, insomnia. That all could be mental health coming out in your body.
Well, where the mind goes, the body will follow.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that one of the things that I've noticed is when I talk to people and I say, well, do you have panic attacks? And I think everybody has a really specific idea of what that is. And they'll say, oh, no, I don't have panic attacks. And then we'll get to the part where we start talking about their anxieties. Like, yeah, well, like about once a month, I can't sleep for a couple of days. And then I have this, like, my stomach really hurts, my heart beats really fast. And I'm like, okay, that's a panic attack.
Right.
Like, it's surprising how people, I think, only associate it with you're so scared that you feel like you're going to have a heart attack.
Like
that's
gonna
like that's
explode.
the only expectation, or the only way that they've heard of it, and so that's the only way that they connect it. So I mean, everybody that I've asked that question or tried to say, well, do you feel like you have a trouble with anxiety? They're like, what do you mean? I was like, do you think that you have like panic attacks? And then they're like, oh no. And most of the time, the people, once I get to know them a little bit better and we start to learn, and they start to learn a little bit more about their bodies and the way that their bodies react, because I feel like that's something that we really work with people who have anxiety with.
We can't always pinpoint our feelings, but we can tell you if we get stomach aches.
Exactly.
And sometimes that can be the way in.
True.
Especially when I work with little kids, they can tell me if they get tummy aches, but they can't tell me they have anxiety.
Yep. When I see children in the ER, the first question, because usually it'll be about depression or anxiety, I just say, so how, that my exact words are, how's your tummy?
Yeah.
Because that usually clues me in.
There's a reason why they call it a gut feeling, because it is that physiological response to the emotions. So, and trust your gut. I always do.
So the next topic we wanted to dive into is kind of like a mishmash of dissociation and or PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in terms of the Hulk. In this particular movie, Incredible Hulk, we see several moments where he's having what seems to be a trauma flashback. He disguises himself as a pizza delivery guy, and he goes to the lab. I think that he had the gamma
where he
radiation
did the gamma
thing
study,
in.
yeah.
And he has a flash of that experience, and that seems to really fuck him up emotionally.
Right. We also see it with the when he sees the machine gun from the helicopter.
Yes, in the shower.
He was
Yeah, the
taking a
shower
shower.
head. The shower
Oh,
head
yeah.
looks like the Vulcan cannon on the helicopter.
Vulcan cannon.
I did ROTC for 2 years and grew up with military family, Brittany. Okay,
No, Ben, we know.
they don't know.
Oh, that's true.
Our listeners may not know that.
Fine. Okay.
My grandfather was a
I
captain. My
apologize.
dad was a senior chief. I know a lot about military stuff. I may say things in technical terms. I'm sorry.
Anyway.
You never have to apologize for being too technical around us. Trust me on that.
Thank you. I get shamed for it with these two all the time.
Well, so here's
And called a nerd.
to get back on track.
You have a safe space
Here's
with us,
the
Ben.
real. Here's the real
Thanks,
question.
guys.
Then, in those moments, is he, when he's Hulk, does he dissociate out of Hulk? And what I mean by that is he present at all? So when he's having those flashbacks, I guess how do those two things live in tandem? Like having trauma flashbacks if you're also not recalling his experiences as the Hulk. Like, is that, because I've had clients with PTSD who have dissociated during the times of the trauma, and then they will remember, and so it's almost like a trauma flashback, but like up to an 11, because not just is it something they're remembering that happened, but it's the first time they're remembering it, and that in itself can be traumatic. So it's like a trauma that's layering on top of themselves. It's the trauma of the actual moment, then remembering the
Traumaception.
moment, and then realizing that actually happened to them because they didn't remember it the first time. And that can really, like, I've seen clients remember something that they dissociated in front of me, and you can see it like blow them back, like a shocking look on their face. And so I wonder,
Yes.
with him, are we seeing just trauma flashbacks, or do you think we're seeing remembrances of dissociation, which is another layer of trauma?
That's a great question. I mean, I could, from what you just described, I did part of my training, through the VA system, dealing with veterans, and I certainly did see a couple of situations where they were, I knew they were re-experiencing it. I would ask them what just happened. Some of them remembered, some of them didn't. It wasn't consistent. But for the most part, the way they described it was they were back, meaning they felt like they were re-experiencing it. And most of the time when I talked to them about it, it was more I almost want to say embarrassed. They couldn't believe that they were placing themselves in a heightened sense of awareness where they thought that they had to act quickly, and when they recognized after that particular moment that they were in an office in a safe environment, like how could that happen again?
Well, and also just their bodily reaction can be really embarrassing. Like if they jump all of a sudden, or start crying all of a sudden, or scream, like especially if it's in a public space, like that's really embarrassing. Like as we see in the flashback in the shower, he falls down as if he's being shot at. So when he's in the moment in that experience.
Right, and they did this cinematically. They did a really good job of showing, he's naked, he's in fetal position, we're showing him from above, so it's like, and it's dark and there's shadows on him. It did a really great job of like conveying the mood of how like embarrassed, desolated, isolated he must have felt in that moment there.
Mm-hmm. I think Hulk is like a really good, because a version of dissociation is depersonalization, which is feeling like your body's not your body anymore, and what happened to someone else using your body, or not even your body at all. And so I feel like Hulk is kind of a good representation of that, like something happening to your body that you didn't have control over, that you don't remember either, and not feeling like connected to a big part of you, and the part of you that's gone through all this stuff. And even though you might not recall it, like with Edward Norton, like if he's not recalling it, he's still having the anxious, traumatic blowback from it, like worked up, like it's in the other ones we talked about him having nightmares. I don't know if this necessarily this movie, but in the other movies he's in,
He has them in this one.
He has nightmares in this one.
So it stays with him, even though he may not be recalling it or being present, quote unquote, present in the moment when the trauma is occurring.
I think what's interesting about him in this movie is that he remembers that he is the Hulk, and he remembers some of the things that happen, and some of them hit him at random moments, which I actually appreciate because that seems consistent with the experience of some of the people I've treated for traumas. I have not had the opportunity to work with veterans with trauma just yet, at least not since I've started doing EMDR, where I've been really intensive trauma work. I've had general therapy when I was more on my internship in my initial licensure, but I haven't had the opportunity to really work with it in depth like Doc was talking about. But what I have had is people who've been survivors of abuse and deaths of family members, and you see interesting snippets of what they recall and when. And I feel like this movie did a great job of representing how you may not have been present or aware of everything. It may have been a derealization or a depersonalization type of experience, but you are still there, and some part of you can recall it. Your brain is still recalling it at certain times, and that can be very distressing for people. And I liked the way this movie represented that.
Well, it's like that book, The Body Keeps the Score. Like, even when you don't recall trauma, it's still inside of you, working its way through you, if nothing else, in a bodily way.
Absolutely.
And I think also what's tricky is, I mean, we can talk about this in treatment more, but like, does he have to then be able to remember his experiences as Hulk in order to work through that trauma and heal? And that's also traumatizing though, which is what makes it difficult too.
I can pick, you know what, I really can picture that. Like, yeah, let's talk about that time you kicked a guy, you know, almost completely through a tree. Yeah, let's
well, I was going to say, to the extent that, you know, the body remembers, but the brain may not. I mean, that may just be like a subconscious reflex response. You know, if it could be a mental suppression tactic to or repress the trauma, but your body may remember a particular instance. And if you are in that situation again, your subconscious will go, this is what you need to do to save your ass. And your body may know what to do better than your brain does. So you may just go on some sort of subconscious autopilot and just say, either I need to, you know, run, or, I mean, it somewhat ties in with the fight or flight, but your body will take advantage or take control and get you out of there, even if your conscious brain does not.
For sure. I mean, I know a lot of people where that starts taking over before they even recognize what they're feeling or that something's happening. Like, and then after the fact, they'll be like, I started to dissociate, or I started to panic, and I can't tell you why. And then as we process it, it might have been something really subtle they didn't even consciously pick up on, which is like a smell, like someone was wearing the cologne of the man who assaulted me, or I walked past a guy who was dressed like that, but I didn't even register it, but my body was like, oh shit, we're about to get hurt, so let's crank it up. And your brain is like trailing far behind, and that can be really overwhelming for like someone experiencing that, because you're trying to catch up with your body's your lizard brain who's trying to keep you safe, but your upper, you know, more intelligent brain is like
is behind,
chasing far after it. And ideally, those two minds get closer and closer. But what I try to tell people is, it's okay if you can only process it way after the fact. The goal is that you get closer and closer from when you're able to reflect upon it to when it actually happens, and ideally be able to recognize it while it's happening. But it's like, that's a journey you have to get on to bring those 2 points together, and to not be discouraged when that happens, because you're learning how to connect those two things together.
And also how sometimes you have to take a couple steps back. Sometimes you're moving along and you get to a trauma that's really hard, and you have to take a step back and just use coping skills and have to stop and just practice to let your brain and your body just kind of calm down. I was also thinking about wondering if it also feels like your body's betraying you, and that it's just something else that you can't control when your body's having a reaction that you don't understand. I don't know if that happens for very many people, but I wonder if, specifically talking about the Hulk, if that's why the version of him in this movie where he just wants him out of his body, he doesn't want to be like him, if it's that thing where my body is just, because he's so smart, right? He's so smart, and his body just betrays him. And he's just like,
that's gotta be infuriating.
He can't do anything about it.
Right, and an entire subplot that we haven't talked about, we didn't talk about on your guys' podcast either, is an entire subplot of this movie is him trying to consult with this other professor to get this thing out of his body.
Yeah, there's no negotiating right now. We're working together. It's like, I gotta kill this part of me, because it's just, there's nothing good about it.
Which makes your part that you said, Anthony, about his identity, and how as he gets closer to accepting who he is, that he's then more able to control it. That makes so much sense, especially with someone with trauma, kind of what you were talking about, Brittany. As we get more connected to ourselves and kind of piece those two pieces together, we are then able to be the whole person that we are, and to be able to really say, yes, that happened to me, but I'm here and this is who I am. and
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. And I think that it would make so much sense that the Hulk, if Bruce Banner and the Hulk finally were like, you know what, you are helpful sometimes, and I am glad that I can save my friends.
And I think that's where he is more now in like the Avenger movies.
Yeah,
where he's
feels
like
that.
I play a role now, to the point that in the Infinity War, he can't become Hulk, and that's really frustrating for him that he can't be Hulk. And so, which I'm really interested to see what that's about psychologically in the next movie.
I know,
If
I
can
hope we
see
get
it
to
through
find
my
out.
tears.
I could jump in on that because I've been speculating about that for a long time.
Oh, let's
after
hear
seeing
it.
That. I'm going to spin it around because I know we were talking about how Banner is looking to gain control of the Hulk, gain control of his body, and make sure that he gets the results that he wants. I'm going to spin it back to Hulk and saying that, as we had discussed in our podcast, if the Hulk is this baby, this own being that's growing and developing, and we saw that in Thor Ragnarok, then my question is the Hulk right now finally starting to develop a personality and is now just flat out afraid? This is the first time Hulk has true fear, not of necessarily of consequence of like, oh boy, people are mad or anything, but more along the lines of the reason why I think he is so afraid, he actually lost a fight.
Yeah, I was going to say
Thanos kicked his ass.
Thanos dissected
Thanos
him.
whipped his butt.
And,
I mean,
just from a fight choreography standpoint, and Doc, and I know you're a big boxing fan. I mean, just the fight choreography between the Thanos and Hulk in the beginning of that Infinity War was beautiful because Thanos was in complete control. Right. Hulk let off the fight, and then Thanos just said, "Nope," the shot to the collarbone, and then he just dropped his fists because he knows I'm in control and you can't do a damn thing about it.
Right, and that's the one thing that everyone has given Hulk credit for. He's this ultimate destruction machine that can beat anything, destroy anything, and now that part of its identity, whatever you want to call it, is just been challenged immensely. So, okay, then how do you integrate that with this other part that said, well, see, that was the only good thing you were there for. I want you to come out, and I'm not even sure I can do that. Like that's the part I at least that's
like
what
he's going through like an existential moment. He's also I wonder too if he's also traumatized himself, and Bruce only lets him come out to get hurt. And so I wonder if he's like matured enough to recognize the score, and he's like, nah, you only let me come out in bad situations, and now I've gotten really hurt and I'm not interested. Like maybe if we're thinking of him like a little kid, like he got really hurt and traumatized, and now he's like, no, you only let me out when something bad's gonna happen to me, and now I can't guarantee that I'm gonna win.
In Ragnarok, when he's been the Hulk for a couple of years as the Hulk, and he's repressed Banner, he doesn't want to go back to Banner because he likes being Hulk, and he's comfortable in that. And when he does go back and he sees Natasha and he gets triggered and eventually reverts to Bruce, he's not thrilled with that situation, but he's been the Hulk for a while and he enjoys it. So that's where that level of maturity and growth and that personality came from, was all that time on Sakaar. But the reason why he was comfortable is because the Grandmaster was rigging all the fights, so he never faced that challenge. So.
Yeah, and I was thinking that maybe he would be around the age of like 12.
I don't know.
It seems about 12
like,
to 14, I would think.
Like 12 to 14 in that movie, where he because look, what kid wants to leave a place where he's the champion and everybody's rooting for him all the time? When most of the time in every other case, he comes out and it's terrifying and he fights and he fights and he fights.
Mid-fight and chaos.
Yeah, and like this is like he's in control of this, and he has a bed that he can sleep on. I mean, geez, he probably never slept on a bed as the Hulk because, right? He's the only turned into him, it seems like, when he's standing up.
He's sleeping in a cave in the rain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's not just a kid thing. I'm 36. Can I live in a place where I get worshipped as a champion? Like,
right?
That sounds
who doesn't
sweet.
want
Yeah,
that?
I'll sign up for that.
Who doesn't want that? So I think, and that makes me think of like a 12-year-old who that really like innocent, really happy look that like a 12-year-old can get if they won something, or if they feel, or like they did really good on a test that they didn't expect, and how that kind of, I wonder if that's kind of how the Hulk feels. And again,
and now he's gotten a taste of it, and now he's like, this shit is not cool how I'm being treated on Earth anymore. Like, I'm not interested in this narrative anymore. It's like when someone's finally introduced to a positive situation, and so their negative situation is intolerable now.
Yeah.
Because now they know something different, and maybe he finally clued in on that and was like, nah, son, not interested. And it makes me wonder if they both have their own, as much as Bruce Banner in this movie has his dissociation and PTSD, I wonder if now Hulk, as he's progressed through these Marvel movies, now has his own PTSD
Absolutely.
and dissociation as Bruce.
I think that may have happened after that fight with Thanos. Like, our guys were describing for us here, is that we see Hulk in Ragnarok as having been in an environment where he's not only, enjoying being Hulk, he's thriving and being rewarded for being Hulk. He's put in situations where being Hulk is good, as opposed to where on Earth, and particularly in this movie, every time he's Hulk, something bad is happening.
People are
And
attacking
maybe-
him, and
maybe
Yeah, it's positive
finally,
reinforcement. Simple and plain.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Very simple and plain.
And maybe finally experiencing being touched by love or by kindness. Like when he's genuinely excited to go practice fighting with
Valkyrie.
Yeah, like he's really excited to go and fight with her, and she kind of like puts her hand on his arm. Like, I really feel like,
Because the big thing in this movie, Incredible Hulk, is whenever Betty, Liv Tyler's character, is tender to him as Bruce and as Hulk, he can relax, and he welcomes
I
that.
feel like the Hulk can relax. I feel like Bruce, remember when it's raining and she's standing in front of him or whatever, and she touches it's not that time. It's the next time when she sees him. My bad. That was incorrect. When she sees him the next time when he's gonna leave, and she touches his face and moves his hair out of his eyes, he flinches. Because I think, again, it's that thing of when has he been touched
that's
by
the
love?
trauma for sure,
Yeah.
too. Is like, all touch is bad touch lately.
Yeah.
And
Well, but for the last
3 years, 4 years, however long.
however long that is.
Yeah,
That's a
and
long
right before
time.
that happens, he's scared, whatever. The lightning comes along and he yells at the sky. Like, I think that's a perfect instance where you see that he's scared, and it goes back to that toddler mindset that he doesn't. I don't know what this is, but it's loud and it's scary, so I'm going to roar at it because I have to establish dominance. Like, that's that mindset.
And I think this is a good way to travel into our next topic, which is the isolation of being a superhero in general, which we kind of touched upon with Civil War when we talked about Captain America Civil War, but more specifically in this situation with the Hulk, which is where you're so scared of hurting other people that you isolate yourself. And
Which is definitely a theme of this whole movie.
Absolutely.
like he starts out being by himself. Everything in Brazil, is it Brazil? It's
Brazil.
Well, and he's
is
not-
by himself.
He's not only by himself, he's not himself. He's not Bruce Banner. He's just
somebody.
Somebody. He's just a body.
Well,
a
and to
worker.
be perfectly honest, he's a white man in a place that's mostly brown people. So not only is he could be targeted just for that alone. Like when
Which he is.
when the
They call him
general
Gringo.
when the general says, find the white guy at that plant, because he knows, because he's gonna stick out.
And it seems like you said, he's given up everything. He's isolated himself to the max degree. Like he's isolated himself from his intelligence, his skill set, his identity, literally other people. He's alone in that place. I mean, he does have that teacher sensei guy that he learns martial arts from.
Which I would love to know more
of the
about that
Gracies.
relationship.
Yeah.
Rickson Gracie. He's an MMA fighter.
I was going to say, he's pretty badass.
Yeah, the whole Gracie family.
He's got a
I
whole
wouldn't-
family
I wouldn't
of
mess with any of that.
badass guys.
Interesting.
You guys can go to a Gracie school. There's one in Chicago here.
I know.
Yeah.
What that is.
There's several of them.
Yep.
Yeah, one of my
But I
friends
think-
takes MMA courses from a Gracie here in Jersey.
Yep. Joy's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu, man.
Just everywhere, I guess.
It's a
Oh,
great
yeah.
Yeah,
thing.
if you would like to learn how to dislocate people's joints very quickly in very acrobatic ways, jiu-jitsu is for you.
True.
So I think even though Hulk is obviously big bombastic, situation, I see this lot, the fear of hurting others causing isolation in real life. People who think that usually what it is somewhere along the line someone decides that they're a bad person, whatever that means. Either I've been abusive, I was abused, I used to do drugs, or I drank and I black out and I hurt people, or I'm just a destructive person because of whatever's going on with me mental health wise. And they will, once they've decided that they're bad, they will isolate themselves to some degree. It's not usually so much as I'm going to go to a whole nother country and live in squalor and like don't and have a separate identity. But it's more like I don't make friends anymore. I don't go out. I go to work and I go home and I
don't
sit
need
alone.
anybody.
I don't deserve anybody.
And I don't deserve anybody, yeah.
And like you see that, I think you see that with Bruce in this movie, that I don't deserve, because he chooses to, when he goes from Brazil to Mexico, or Brazil to Guatemala, yeah, as he's moving his way up, he chooses to live homeless in like
that
next
was
to a
really
dumpster,
sad.
in like with almost no clothes. He's just living in tattered rags, in begging. Not even begging. He doesn't even feel like he deserves to beg. He just sits there in this horrible state of depression.
He has his hands out.
Well, he had his hands in his face like this. I don't know that he was begging or if he was just had his hands in his face and someone saw him and
that is true.
Put money there. I mean, that's been ambiguous for me.
But it says a lot of his feelings of self-worth right now. Like, he doesn't feel like he deserves clean clothes, safety, shelter.
Shelter, the way he's just sitting out in the rain. Like, I'm sure he could stand underneath a fucking overhang thing somewhere.
Yeah, like,
yeah.
I know a lot of it is self-preservation in terms of running away and, like, trying to keep himself safe in terms of running from General Ross or whatever. But I think a lot of it felt to me like I deserve to be here because I've been a bad person. I've done bad things. I've hurt the woman I love and blah, blah, blah. And so I deserve whatever happens to me while I'm trying to run away and be on the run.
Yeah, I'm actually curious, Doc, you say you work in the ER. I'm wondering if you see people that have presented like this in the ER where they're in such a desolate state of depression that they would mimic what we saw at a Banner in this movie.
Yes, I do. I would say, and it varies. I've had cases where people that are ironically in recovery with substance abuse, I've seen many of those people, especially if they're trying to work the steps of AA or NA, they get to the point where they're trying to, at some point they've tried to reach out to people, and some of those people haven't exactly forgiven them for either their previous behavior or just the fact that the relationship has gone wrong. And, they don't get past that step. They basically have said, I guess they're right. I've done bad things, therefore I'm a bad person. Catastrophizing to that level. Also, unfortunate situations of people who have, there's no other way to say it, who've done some bad things. They've been abusers, and they are, at some point experiencing some level of contrition for that. But they either don't know how to process the idea that they can change, their system of how they're handling things in life, or they don't even know if it's even worth it to do that, because they come to the realization that their way of processing their emotions has led to further trauma for others, and they figure that it's going to continue like that. And I think that's definitely, germane to how, the Hulk gets portrayed as this. Basically, Banner at this point is someone who has run the full spectrum of having everything that we would consider to be a standard life, has a job, has a person he cares about, has, the basic amenities, and has gone to nothing. Most of the time, if you hear someone come to that situation, we would like to think, we'll say, okay, how do I change it? How do I make it better? Some people basically, in my experience in the ER, have come to the conclusion of, if this has already happened, then I've gone through 5-10 years of this. What's to say that, even if I work at it, what's to say that it's going to be anything that's going to change in the next, how long? Year? 2 years, 10 years, the rest of my life? It becomes a difficult situation to almost like bargain with them or negotiate with them and say, or at least the way I like to tell the person in the moment, you may not have hope, so I'll have hope for you. I almost, try and take that burden off of them temporarily. You don't have to make that decision.
I mean, I think that hopelessness is a really key thing that you hit on there, especially when you've done so many maybe genuinely bad things because of substance use, because of anger, because of your own mental health stuff that you weren't managing. That, and especially if there are people in your life who are like, yeah, you really fucked it up a few times and I don't know if I can forgive you. And they validate those horrible thoughts you already have about yourself. And there's proof that you did these things, which is also bad. Feeling like, yeah, there is no hope. And even if you try to do something different, fuck, how long is that going to take? And the hopelessness of that journey. Like, I don't know if I can work that hard to do this thing that I don't even know if I'm capable of, because I don't know if I'm a good person on the inside. Like, I would say, to bring it back to Captain America Civil War, we talked about Bucky in the same context in that movie where he's like, people, I think he says, he like deep sighs in one scene and he says, people always get hurt. Like, he's decided, like, if people are around me, it's going to get bad. There's no other options but fighting and destruction and pain. And it's just, there's so much hopelessness coming off of him. And I think Banner in this movie is the same way. It's just, unless I can kill him out of me entirely, no, there's no other option that has hope. And that's really, I mean, if you don't have hope and buy-in, like, that's everything in terms of mental health progress. And I think a good thing you pointed out is letting your support system hope for you, or doing it for your support system. Like, if you don't love yourself, can you trust that your family members love you and your love for them, and that you love them, and that you'll do this for them
until you can do it for yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely it's so funny you bring up telling people that you'll hold on to their hope for them. That's something that I feel like I say in most of my sessions, especially sessions with couples. Because letting them know you're in a relationship where you've lost hope for things being able to be different, that my job is, I'm going to hold on to the hope for you until you can hold it for yourself. And that's my job. And I believe that this can change, and I believe that I can help you.
Yeah, I've had the discussion with clients where I've said, you might not believe that this will help you, but do you believe that I know what I'm doing and that I've helped other people do this thing? And sometimes they can believe that. They'll be like, yeah, I know. Like, can you believe I went to school? I got trained in this. Can you believe that I'm an expert in this? At least for other people, I've been able to do this. And maybe they can get there. Because I think what's so hard and why people do isolate themselves is because when you are going through something, especially trauma, worthlessness, things like that, is everything feels in an egocentric way. Yeah, but not for me. Yeah, they can get better, but not me.
I can't.
I can't. Yeah.
Or I don't, I'll keep tying this in, but what I think I see a lot is I don't deserve it. And I see that so much. I bring that up because I see that so much in this version of Bruce Banner. In the other versions of Bruce Banner, now, Anthony, maybe you are much more an expert in Hulk than I am. Maybe you could speak to this a little bit, but with Banner's version, or not Banner's, Norton's version, we see a lot of the I don't deserve it. And I'm kind of curious if that exists throughout the Hulk canon of I don't deserve to get better.
I would say yes. That's certainly a recurring thing. To the extent that it's involved in the storylines depends on the writer and what tactic they're taking on the Hulk. Because again, he's been around since, as we said in our episode, he's been around since 1962. So the runs on the character have been as varied as you can imagine. And we talk about the different personas in our episode. There's the Joe Fixit and the Doc Green and so on. There's the different iterations of the Hulk. But there is typically, yes, that recurring thought that he doesn't deserve this because he's done wrong, and it's guilt, and he's racked with guilt, and he feels that, and Doc used an excellent word, contrition, which I feel is not used nearly enough as it should be, frankly. But he feels that he needs to pay penance for his actions, and as a result, he's going to either isolate himself or he's going to, throw himself into scientific research or study as Bruce to try and do good to balance out the harm that he's caused. He almost takes like a utilitarian view of doing good and what is the good thing. I don't know if any of you watch The Good Place, but it's a
yes. Oh, love that show.
General gasp.
Mortals, boy.
Agreed.
But so that there's a lot of the things that in that show that Chidi brings up in terms of it's not just simply like a balance. Like you're not trying to just get points and try to accumulate good points to balance out the negative things that you've done. Just the mere concept of karma. Because that's not
altruistic.
Exactly. You're only doing it just to balance out the bad, not because there's the inherent value in being good. So, but bringing this back to the Hulk, there is certainly, instances where he has felt that he needs to redeem himself or do other acts to compensate for the harm that he has caused, either physical, emotional, mental, what have you. So that is definitely something that has recurred throughout the decades in the character, in the comics. And even in the TV show, the Lou Ferrigno, Bill Bixby, there was a lot of that was brought up that he needed to help people to make up for all the damage that he caused. That was a huge part of the television show.
Well, I mean, and that's how the whole the meme or trope, whatever you want to say, of him hitchhiking with the sad music and all of that. That was the point. He was a drifter. The idea that he wouldn't have a lasting relationship with any one person because the second that the Hulk showed up, it was going to lead to negative consequences that he would either have to abandon or he would have to find some way to make up for it.
And I think that calls to like the isolation, I think, of the superhero in general, which is this idea that if people are around me due to the nature of what I do and who I am, they'll always get hurt. And so I think there's this weird with all of them. I mean, you could say this about like Captain America, Tony Stark to a certain extent, Batman for sure, is this idea that in order for me to effectively be a superhero, I have to also be alone. And the toll that would take on you as an effective person, I mean, not to get too woo-woo about it, but you could say like, in order to be the best version of yourself as a superhero, you have to take care of yourself. And part of that's having a support system. And I don't think Bruce Wayne would listen to me about that. But
that was mentioned in the Spider-Man movies.
Daddy Butler.
In both the Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, the ending of the first Tobey Maguire movie is he tells Mary Jane, he's like, no, I can't be with you. In the first the first Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movie, he promises Dennis Leary that he's going to leave. He's going to leave Gwen Stacy alone. And then they undercut it at the very end when he's like, some promises are made to be broken. Smirk. I was like, fuck you. That is such an undercut of the entire narrative of the film. It was just such a slap in the face to like Captain Stacy's not even cold in the ground, you asshole, and like you're already just like I know I made this dying promise. Ooh. I know I made this promise to this dying man, but I really want to shtup Emma Stone, so I'm just gonna say well, he's not here to stop me, so but that notion that they have to push people away, and Wolverine, God, how many people has Logan pushed away over the years? And
but how many ladies have died
Rogue
though
in the chest in X2? That's the first one.
Yeah.
Oh, the first one. He has a nightmare and stabs her in the chest.
Yeah.
It's rough stuff. I mean, I guess with him, this might be like I had this thought pop in my head, and this might be controversial. And it's definitely something that I would be very, very, very mindful of bringing this up to my client, depending on the client and how they're presenting and our rapport, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that he does, this is going to sound dark, the fact that he doesn't straight up kill himself, Bruce Banner says that he has hope in there to have the life he had before. Because the way he solve this whole problem and the Hulk is straight up.
There's a great Avengers moment that a lot of people overlooked that Anthony and myself, when we saw it, did not overlook.
When in the Avengers, when they're all on the helicarrier, and he said, I got low, so I put a bullet in my mouth, and the other guy spit it out.
Oh,
yeah, that's right.
I haven't watched the first Avengers movie in a few years.
So in other words, he has reached that point at some, at some instance.
Yeah.
And but then that also brings it back to, well, that doesn't mean that my life is worth it. That just means I have this other thing that's still causing so much damage. Mm-hmm. I can't even effectually do anything to stop it. So that in theory could have just.
That is another layer of hopelessness.
Yeah, it is.
I can't even kill myself. Like, I can't even choose to end my own life.
Which, in all honesty, I have the unfortunate situation where I've seen that with some patients in the ER after attempts. be it overdose. Yeah. I did mention in a previous podcast episode, I think it was the Doctor Strange one, I had a person who was a surgeon, and they basically self-eviscerated, and it didn't work. So... And then
to go off, besides a hold up, I think one of the best examples of that, and this isn't a superhero movie, but A Little Miss Sunshine, the scene where Steve Carell's character, I don't know if you remember this, guys, but he has attention.
I saw it, but it was
and they go to the hospital, and he's like, I'm not excited that I made it through this.
Yeah.
I wish I had died. Because I think sometimes it's such a touchy subject, but I think to recognize for some people who are suicidal, surviving an attempt wasn't a wake-up moment for some of these people. I think a lot of people are
failure.
They live through it, and they're I've seen the light, and I realize I want to be here, and life came through my body, and I've changed my mind about everything.
Now I can't even kill myself properly. What kind of a fuck up am I?
Absolutely.
I can't even do that right.
For them, the struggle has not ended. It's continued on, and that in itself is so horrible to them.
When it's so painful, already. And then to be I can't even get rid of the pain, and now it's just, what is the point of this?
And I get why it's a taboo topic, but I think that it is something to address, with the situation you just brought up with Bruce, where he tried to kill himself. As a therapist, that might be something you'd want to validate for them. I'm sorry that you made that hard choice and that it didn't work out like you wanted. And I'm sure I could see me if I said that in front of a loved one of that person, why they'd want to hit me in the face
or sue you
or sue me
immediately.
How dare you? Yeah, like that.
But that's the thing of meeting your client where they're at in a healthy way. I wouldn't be that sucks, it didn't work out. Do you want me to help you think of the next thing? That's you're not problem solving the situation. Right. You're just validating that you made a really hard choice for your well-being, and it didn't work out. And I'm sorry that didn't happen like you wanted it to happen. So what do you want to do now? And not necessarily what's your next plan to off yourself, but how are we going to move forward through this and maybe see the other side?
Yep.
Now, one character that we've been talking a lot about Bruce and the Hulk, and obviously he's the focal point of the film. But I want to touch at least a little bit, and certainly because we didn't cover it in the podcast because ours was strictly on the Hulk as a character. But Emil Blonsky, I think, has a very intriguing story throughout this film. And
does he have background in the comics that would be helpful? Because I feel in this movie, they do mention he's military, that he's getting older, in the military. But there's not that I caught a lot. His character's kind of one-dimensional.
Well, he's a Royal Marine, so he's special forces.
Okay.
So he's an absolute warrior, but he's aging. He's reaching the point where he's should obsolete. And what his conversation with General Ross is indicating is that hey man, you should be in command right now. You shouldn't be out in the field. And he's like, no, this is my identity. I'm going to fight until I can't. And that's why he becomes the Abomination. So, Anthony, I don't want to jump you. I just...
Well, no, I was just going to say that, in the comics, he's Russian, and they sort of hand wave it that, in the movie, oh yeah, he was born in Russia, but he was raised in England or whatever. But basically that... he was he was a KGB agent in the comics who bombarded himself with gamma radiation, and then he transforms and decides that he's going to fight the Hulk. So, I mean, the Abomination in the comics is a kind of a separate character. But the notion but I like what they did with him in this film, where they give him a reason to submit himself to these tests. Like Ben said, he's getting older, and he has that great line, if I could take what I know now and put it in the body of someone 10 years younger, that would be someone I wouldn't want to mess with. He has all this experience in this training, and he's getting older, and his reflexes are a little slower, and there is that appeal to him as a military man to be able to serve and fight, that he's got that instinct in him. And I love the Abominate, that first fight scene, where he's running around and he's shooting. I love the choreography in that entire sequence.
To bring it back a little bit in terms of, I can't make a diagnosis with Blonsky because there's not enough information, but I will say this: I've had this experience with other patients who have been in the military, who are seeking therapy, point out. I'll ask them, is there something that's helped you let's say they have some symptoms of PTSD, not a formal diagnosis. Is there anything that has helped you cope with some of the things that you've been experiencing? And on multiple occasions, the response I'll get is, if you put me back in combat, I'd be just fine. That's the level of comfort that they've had with certain environments, certain experiences, and that's what came to mind when I saw in the movie, seeing Blonsky react the way he did to certain circumstances. The idea that he may not be able to translate that to other parts of his life, other parts of his society, other parts of society as a whole, he may just want to relish that idea. If I'm fighting something like the Hulk and that's all I need to do constantly, then I don't have to make adaptations. I don't have to develop other coping mechanisms. I can just do
it sounds kind of like, it makes me think of people who are institutionalized in any context of the word. Like people who, I mean, they talk about in Shawshank Redemption, but I know that's of, fictional people. But like being comfortable being back in the prison situation, or being comfortable being in an institution of some sort, like a mental health, situation, liking the structure and the fear that comes with losing that structure, whatever that structure means to them, or just doubling down so hard on such a specific part of your identity. And then, especially something like the military, where, from what I understand of it, it like is your whole life for however long you're in it. And there's not really like especially if you're like doing tours and stuff, like that is your whole life. Like you don't have like downtime, or you're not developing a personal life or getting a girlfriend.
I mean, and for special forces guys, it's an extra level of that. Those guys they've gone through selection where they have had to put themselves in extreme circumstances in order to put themselves in the most extreme circumstances human beings can do, and it's a badge of honor in order to do that. And they're revered and looked upon as the superheroes of their own right because of the level of physical fitness and mental acuity that they have to maintain, and mental toughness to do the jobs that they do. I mean, these guys are halo jumping and like doing all kinds of like really dangerous, really risky, really tactical maneuvers that require so much specialization. It's like when you see they achieve flow in ways that can't be achieved by many other positions. It's why surgeons have such a hard time, particularly trauma surgeons have such a hard time with adjusting once they retire. There's a high suicide rate there because they've been doing something so specialized that requires so much risk and so much focus, and there's so much reward for doing that can't be matched by other things. And these guys, as well as like NFL athletes and other retired athletes, attain this level of dominance in the world that can't be matched by other things, and they have a really hard time adjusting. So when you take that away from someone, or they start aging out from it where they can't do it anymore, it's threatening their entire identity that they've worked their whole life and sacrificed everything for.
I mean, it all is a good motivator for, you have to have, I mean, it sounds corny, a well-rounded life. Like, I think what's hard in these situations, what I'm hearing is people who just become one version of their identity, and for some reason, for like, and in some of those cases for a good reason, like you said, like trauma surgeons, like NFL players, like military special forces, like you do have to spend so much of your life just doing that one thing and having very narrow focus in order to be really good at that thing and to do that thing properly,
and to fit in the culture.
Yeah, but the side effect then is that you're not anything else.
I think there's also another layer of that for people who are in special forces, that you also have, there's a whole secrecy part to that, where you can't talk about things with certain people, and you can't,
anything.
You can't tell anybody anything. So when you're experiencing some things that are that specific and that hard, and you're so trained for that, and also you can't tell anybody about it, which means you also can't be vulnerable and share your heart with anyone because you have to keep it kind of closed up.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a lot of sense that their identity would be so solely grounded in the fact that they are a Green Beret or whatever Navy, whatever that guy is.
SEAL?
Navy SEAL. Yeah, I can't remember.
He's a Royal Marine. He's there's some other degree of specialty, but I know they say he's a Royal Marine.
S something, right?
SAS.
SAS.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
he's a bad dude is what he is.
Yeah,
and I think another
the baddest of the bad.
But I think another version of this too, more specific to Blonsky's character, is this identity of aggression, and that and strength and like being able to overpower. I mean, I think what's also so tempting to him, so like seductive to him about being like Bad Hulk, like being the Abomination, is it's aggression run amok, it's control run amok, it's power, like he could beat down anybody. And I think it seems like his character, and I would argue General Ross as well, like there's a lot of worth and value on being the baddest, like alpha dog in the room and being in control and all that's like pack mentality and like alpha dog mentality. And when you lose that, there's this panic, like General Ross going after the Hulk and all this non-negotiable stuff with him. Like General Ross is, which is hilarious when he does this like Sokovia Accords later, he's like laying waste left, right, and center to civilian areas like that college, that bridge, the civic works of this town. And
well, I mean, he's rolling a BTR and a Apache helicopter in. Like those are serious weapons of war.
Yeah.
And so
firing 50
there's
cals,
this
he's got
very,
sonic weaponry. He's just, I don't care about anything else. I don't give a shit about collateral damage. We need to take down the Hulk now.
Because something
right, and
is
let's talk
bigger
about
and more
50 cal
powerful.
for a second. 50 cal is not like it's against the Geneva Convention to use 50 cal against humans. Like that's supposed to be anti-vehicle weapon. Like that bullet is going to shoot through the engine block of a truck.
And I think what the whole thing made me think of, and Hannah as well, because we watched this movie together last night, is
as we often do,
when I'm in sessions with more often than not a man, so apologies to all the males, if they're being feeling like they're being forced into treatment, these kind of people usually don't come to treatment on their own unless they're being forced in some regard. And there is this like stubbornness and double downing on things, and they like won't adjust to change and they won't negotiate, and they have to be in control and they have to top dog the situation to the detriment of their relationships, like General Ross and his daughter, to the detriment of the safety of others. Like all his decisions in this movie arguably make everything 1,000 times worse, and he's refusing to learn from it. And Blonsky as well, like all these what I would consider impulsive decisions, and in order to be in control via aggression of the situation. And there's no learning and there's no adapting and there's no thinking things through. It's all this very like, I gotta be in control. I gotta be the baddest guy in the room. And I mean, there's even a certain amount of, like dick measuring between Ross and Blonsky. Because he's the one who's like, what are you, 42? And Blonsky's like, no, I'm 39. He's like, rough. It's really aged you. It's like, so there is this like demeaning energy between both of them that I think cranks each other up. And just leads to this toxicity among the whole situation.
Yeah, well, both Ross and Blonsky are singular focused on the Hulk, and I think that's the thing. Not even getting into the merits of that and the masculinity and the other things that we've touched on briefly. It's about singular focus, and their objective is to get the Hulk back. Now, again, like I said, whether that's good or bad, it's a whole other discussion, but that's their focus. So that's why they do the things they do. That's why they're taking the risks that they take, why Blonsky is willing to submit himself to, the super soldier serum, and why Ross uses all of the heavy machinery and the high, heavy caliber guns and so on, because that's all he cares about. He doesn't give a shit about anything else. Mm-hmm. He needs to take down the Hulk. That's end of story. So that's what that's about.
Make you, and I get the argument that he's trying to contain a bad situation, but also it seems like if he just left him alone, Bruce Banner alone, things would be okay.
But then he wouldn't have the weapon.
Right.
I mean, that's what I mean. But like, he's not thinking of the good of.
We got like 5 people talking at once. Hold on. Pause. Okay, who wants to go first?
Okay. All I was going to say with that was, the weaponization. It wasn't just a matter of who's going to win this dick waving contest. It's also, how are we going to utilize this for future reference, for future uses, and make sure that I'm going to be in control no matter what for, however many future fights are going to come. The other thing, is the inevitability that it seems like it's a given that, at least if you go by General Ross or Blonsky or people like this, what's the end game here? The end game isn't stop the Hulk. The end game is how do we maintain power for as long as possible using the Hulk?
Exactly.
You know? It's
which, I mean, is
trying to prolong things, not end them.
And I wonder, I mean, there's a certain level of egocentrism in that I think they masquerade as like
patriotism
and the well-being of the all. That really is, I want the biggest, baddest weapon. I can't stand that there's something out there that I'm not utilizing that could dominate me.
Yeah.
And I know there's two ways to look at that, and I'm definitely skewing it the one way. But I think it's an interesting thing that I kept noticing throughout the movie is this lack of adaptability, this constant like ratcheting things up, and no ability to, because that's what Betty kind of does to her dad, is calls him out, and she, the only female character really, calls him out and says, why are you doing this? Just leave him alone or do something different. Like, this is not going somewhere good. And he's like, I love you, but also I don't care. And I need you to like goodbye. Like, he just tries to like say like, you'll come around to it. Or like, he doesn't really take what she's saying into consideration, even though she's using their whole relationship as like, you know, on the table about it. Yeah.
It's emotional collateral. And it's clear that he's like, the only reason you're not in jail is because you're my daughter. Like, that's...
He alpha dogs her in that situation. Instead of listening, he tries to dominate that.
That's all he does is dominate. And it shows like the culture of, like we've been talking about, we've been alluding to it. We haven't just flat out said what we're talking about, which is toxic aggression and masculinity when it goes too far.
Yeah.
And we see that to the point with that they're willing to sacrifice their relationships with their daughter. And in Blonsky's case, it's not clear that he has a relationship with anyone outside of his troops. And he is willing to sacrifice his body and his sanity, because we see him, he's very rational, like clear-minded, but he's super disciplined in what he's doing. When we see him in Brazil, like, he's not taking shots that could be at civilians, he's not risking anybody's life other than people who are soldiers, and you see him get progressively more erratic as he started to take this super serum. You see his appearance starts to change. He starts to get a little stubble. His hair gets messy. Like, these are not things special forces guys do. He's
like degrading, deteriorating.
He's degrading and deteriorating, and we're seeing it visually as he's becoming less trim, primped, and proper, to the point where he's now getting impulsive and making rash decisions.
So
he sucks. I hate him.
Well,
thanks,
we want
Hannah.
to segue to, unless you guys have something else you want to add, we could segue to the treatment portion. So I don't know. Do you want to go first, Doc?
You know, it's interesting because I kind of already threw all my darts out when we did our podcast for Capes on the Couch, where I mentioned the medication pieces for things like this, and the idea that there are multiple tools in the toolbox, but you don't have to just use those in perpetuity. I will mention a category that is very specific to PTSD, dissociation, that I didn't mention before, which is beta blockers, because they're so important for the autonomic nervous system. They're basically, it's a blood pressure medication and a heart rate medication, but also there's been studies that have shown that especially within the first early moments of a trauma, that it can have a positive effect. Those are, as with most research, has been I don't want to say dismissed, but it's not as robust as we first thought it was, but can still be useful for that type of treatment. Anything else involving therapy, I know you guys would probably school my ass pretty easily, but hey, I'm giving credit where it's due, though. The thing with someone like this, that it's just, I feel like just constantly reliving this level of trauma and anxiety. I'd like to find some sort of comfort zone for them. Like, what's an environment that is going to allow you to discuss these things in a non-threatening manner? I'd like to find that first.
For sure.
And once I got that and established that, I'll tell you right now, my background in terms of CBT was rational and motive behavioral therapy. Shout out to Albert Ellis.
He only got kicked out of his own institute once.
I'm not gonna lie. It's a little risky in terms of, let's say, if we were dealing with this with a panic side of things. One of my supervisors had pointed out sometimes he would hope that a patient would have a panic attack in his office, and he would try and work him through it. And no matter how bad it got, or even if he was giving them recommendations and the patient or client wasn't responding well, ultimately at some point it would end, and he would conclude with, okay, so let's take your pulse and let's point out that you're alive. And when's like almost deadpan? Well, okay, so when's the next session? And some patients or some clients would respond like, "Are you freaking kidding me?" Like,
yeah.
And the point is actually, no, I'm not kidding you. You just survived a panic attack in my office. Even when things were going wrong. What does that tell you? And what does that mean your body is telling you? It means that the responses that you're having may be in the moment, but they're going to go away, and you're going to survive it. So just even getting that level of feedback would be a positive. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing that with all clients. Just giving that as an example of ways that sometimes you can get results in a relatively short period of time, because anybody that's heard our podcast knows a lot of times I mention that therapy is a gradual and long process. But that doesn't mean that you can't have those moments where you can really start to spike someone's treatment, so to say.
So something I'm curious about, particularly from your perspective, I just did a training on hypnosis, and I was surprised by the number of MDs that were in the training for that and the applications of ER use that it gets. I'm wondering how you would view hypnosis as a possible treatment for Bruce Banner.
I would love it. I'll say I don't have direct experience with it, and to be blunt, I'm jealous of you that you have received that training, because that's something that I've been interested in for quite a long time. It was
excellent.
Yeah, the one thing I'll always say with hypnosis, because I know all the stereotypes associated with it, and once again the media portrayal and all of that, you're not going to make anyone do anything that they wouldn't be willing to do.
No.
So it would just be establishing with someone like Banner, like you point out that you want to you want to make changes with how you're responding to situations, how both mind and body. This will give you an opportunity. Then we can kind of explore different states of mind, different conditions, and really see how we can make progress there. So I love it. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
With a trained, a person trained to do it.
Right. Not talking about like a hypnotist guild hypnotist, like a clinical hypnosis trained person, because it's very different. But what I think about it, and why I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on it, is because with Bruce Banner, we've talked a lot about this depersonalization and derealization kind of states that kind of trigger the Hulk, and those are natural states that the brain enters as a defense. With hypnosis, you can pseudo-trigger something similar to that, but in a peaceful state where someone is willingly taking themselves there so that they can learn to maybe control that side of themselves and go like, okay, I can get here when I want to, as opposed to it being something that is only triggered by the worst events of my life.
Yeah.
And I think for Bruce, that might be a very interesting thing to find.
Yeah, that's good. I'll be honest, I hadn't thought about it in that capacity. But yeah, I mean that sounds excellent. That sounds fascinating.
And might be one of the only ways that you could really help him be able to manage, like to let him feel what it feels like in his body to actually be calm.
Right.
And like to be able to identify that in a safe way, because he's calm and he's, not under,
virtual Hulk.
Yeah, right. Because my first therapist did hypnosis therapy with me. And it was really helpful, and also wasn't this like weird thing where she made me do weird stuff or where I don't remember what happened or anything. It was just I was just really, really relaxed, and it helped me be able to talk to her, because that was one of the things I was dealing with. So I feel like with Bruce, to be able to have him do that, it might be really one of the only ways he could have successful healing in our world. Like,
Right, in our world, and I know in your guys' podcast we talked about like in-universe things, and I specifically didn't mention this for that because we were talking about it a little bit differently. And for our listeners, you've heard me talk about EMDR a lot, and EMDR and hypnosis have some parallels, but they're not the same. Not at all. Like EMDR specifically prevents you from getting into that state by keeping you in the dual awareness. But with why I like discussing the hypnosis here is with him that I feel like teaching him that the important part you learn about hypnosis as a trained provider is that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. It's a natural state that's been around since the beginning of human condition. Being able to put yourself in a trance is something all of us have done. Brittany's giving me looks right now because she is so
I don't want to be
against it.
hypnotized.
It's
Stop
fine.
asking.
You are the only one who can make that decision. Like it's only you. No one can hypnotize you.
Control issues about this.
They can get you there. But what I think would be fascinating would be to use this tool because one of the things that I learned about was that with chronic pain, you kind of teach clients to have a remote where they learn that, when you have chronic pain, you're not in pain all the time. You have pain, and sometimes the level is higher and sometimes the level is lower. So I took that theory and went, okay, if someone has anxiety, the same thing applies, does it not? Like they're more anxious sometimes and more anxious other times, but if you're generally anxious, you're anxious all the time. It's just louder sometimes. And I've had some actually pretty strong success teaching clients to use the same concept where let's work on getting control of it like you would chronic pain. You're going to turn it up first. We're going to go on through hypnosis and then we're going to turn up the pain so that you experience what it's like to control it going up because you haven't even conceptualized that before. And then I watch them as their heart rate rises, their body tenses, and then I guide them right back down through the pain and okay, now let's turn the anxiety down. And I want you to feel your body relax and I want you to let your mind go to a place where you feel relaxed as we keep clicking that remote down. And I see their thumbs pressing down on the remote as they go through it. And it is really amazing. And I think that would be super helpful for Bruce. So if he would be willing to go there with me, that would be my treatment of choice, I think, for this Bruce. It'd be like, let's work on getting you to that point where you can get yourself calmed down and you can have this kind of mental remote where you can turn this anxiety down.
I'll just do really briefly. I think one thing I wanted to touch upon in this movie specifically, I think they do show certain things that are actually pretty therapeutically helpful. He does the deep breathing, the deep diaphragm breathing. Very specifically, they show that breathing from the properly. And I think that was actually a really good example of proper breathing to kind of get your heart rate down, to help you chill out. I think also learning a martial art, connecting himself back into his body. That's very good. We kind of touched upon the watch he wears and kind of the pros and cons of that, so I won't go into that again. But I think one thing that you brought up, Doc, that's really good to note is until you can kind of get him in a safe place in his life, I don't know how much progress he can ever make because Hulk, he has people after him. He has to, Hulk comes out because he can only control it so much because he's under attack. So I think, because I'll work a lot with families, with kids, and I'm like, until you make a safe home for this kid to be in, until they're either out of their abusive household or you've put restrictions down in the household for contact or rules or boundaries, or you're going to stop yelling at the kid, then the kid can do better and start to learn coping skills and kind of be less anxious and angry himself. But until they're in an environment where they feel safe and they don't need to rely on these behaviors that are deemed maladaptive, they're not going to change. And I wouldn't ask them to change because it also could be, like we've talked about before, that these responses are keeping them safe. It's unrealistic to ask Bruce to not worry about being Hulk or to have different thoughts about it when it is something that's very out of control. He is under attack all the time. He is on the run. We talk Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a food pyramid triangle. And the bottom layer is your basic needs, food, shelter, clothing. And that feeling of safety. And he doesn't have that. And so until he has that, you can't expect people to grow. There's no foundation to your house if you don't have that stuff. So you can't start building on top of that. So first, Bruce would need those basic things, and then he could start working on these more sophisticated ideas of like self-actualization and like coping skills and social supports and all that stuff. And then I would say the last thing, which I think Hannah's going to talk about more, so I'll only touch upon it, is we haven't talked about at all, which is Hulk's reaction to Betty in this movie. She's very tender with him. She's very loving. She's kind of like more of like a mama to him in this movie. And he, maybe because Hulk is a baby, responds very well to that. Like, comes out of Hulk, calms down, protects her. And so I think it's a good example of someone having a different response to the person who's struggling, and how them just showing them something different can make them feel better, and that there is hope because someone can love me and be comforting to me, and there's another way to live. And I think also with him, she does a lot of like, you are a good person and you can do something different and you can have control. And I think having someone, especially when you've decided you're bad, having someone in your corner reminding you of who you are and who you've been and who you can be is very powerful. And then I'll switch it over to Hannah.
So when I was thinking about how I would do treatment, I was thinking about doing treatment, doing couples counseling with Betty and the Hulk. And how all of these things that Ben and Brittany have both said are the most important, right? Like, I couldn't have him probably until after he saw Ben, or until after he saw Brittany. Like, there's no way that I could have them come in as a couple in the state that he is in, hiding and scared and everything else. So we're doing it in this under the assumption that he's learned coping skills, he feels more connected to his body, connected to the Hulk. Right. However, he still has the same triggers of becoming the Hulk, right? Like, once his heart rate reaches 200. One of the interactions with him and Betty in this movie, when they're making out and they're trying to be intimate with each other, and he's like, we can't do anything. Like, I can't do anything because my heart rate's going to get too high. And how, again, his experience, it's just not being able to feel like, have somebody touch him with love or with desire or with wanting, like any of those things, and him not being able to experience that, regardless of anything else, that alone in their relationship would just tear them apart. They wouldn't be able to, it just wouldn't work.
Like, the failed sex scene was so sad.
Oh my God, it was so fucking sad. So I think what I would do couples therapy with them, but I think one of the things I would really focus on is how they could be intimate with each other without, in whatever way they can, kind of letting them kind of like brainstorm and find things that would work for them.
And also because get rid of the shame he might feel for having this barrier in their relationship. Yeah,
and just how...
Or shame men feel in general.
Yeah, I was going to say, not even the toxic masculinity, just masculinity.
Yeah, for sure.
I was thinking virility is pretty well tied to that.
In terms of like alternate forms of intimacy, I don't know if any of you saw the film 40 Days and 40 Nights with Josh Hartnett.
The feather scene.
What?
The feather scene everybody talks about.
Yeah.
Orchid?
Yeah, but,
it's an orchid girl.
Whatever it is, the flowers and the feathers and all those other things. Like, there are other ways to be intimate without necessarily physically touching another person. I mean, obviously, yes, skin-to-skin contact is huge. It's why they promote it so heavily for infants and such. But there are ways to be intimate without it. And if they can at least start that, until such time as he gets a little more control over it and he's able to keep that under wraps. And then maybe they could start with other things. Who knows? It would have to be you'd need probably like a sex therapist in addition to, just a mental health professional to be able to address some of these things. But that is an option.
Likely.
But I think that, I totally agree. And I think that part of it would just be also just even letting them be in an environment where they can talk about, I don't know what I'm supposed to be talking into, clearly. Jesus. I'm like losing my mind. I'm talking into this. Whatever.
An environment where they're safe together.
An environment where they're safe together, but also an environment where they can consider that their sex life might not be like everyone else's. So often I feel like couples have this idea of what they're supposed to be like intimately, and that if they're not this way, then that means something for both people who are in the relationship. And so I think letting them kind of explore that and opening up that conversation, I think would be really important. And then I agree. I think they would probably have to see a sex therapist. I agree that I think just with the physiological changes and differences with their bodies, like that's a whole other thing that a sex therapist would probably have to deal with. But I do think that that's what I would want to focus on with them, is just helping them think about that differently and also giving them a place where they feel safe enough to talk about it. Because I really think that that would be something that they would have to be able to figure out if they were going to be together.
Absolutely.
So, final thoughts about this movie specifically, Incredible Hulk. Do we like it? Do we hate it? Do we have critiques? General thoughts? I'll throw it to you guys first.
I mean, just for me, not necessarily coming from a mental health standpoint, but just as a comic aficionado, I appreciated this. This was an early entry into the MCU, and I feel that it's certainly a slightly different film than some of the later ones that have come along, because Disney and Marvel Studios, for better or worse, kind of formalized your standard Marvel film, and this one definitely doesn't fit into those formulas. But taking that aside, I like it for what it is. It's still, to me, in the bottom half of MCU films of all of the, 16 or 20, however many fucking films there are at this point. It's in the bottom half only because I just think it's a little underdeveloped at times. Mm-hmm. For better or worse, the Marvel formula knows what it is and is very, very good at it. And particularly since this one followed immediately on the heels of Iron Man, which is still one of the top 5 MCU films. It definitely fell flat. But I like it. It sets up the Hulk, I think, for, if nothing else, the character growth and progression that he's given over the subsequent films. And I think it's done a lot more justice by Mark Ruffalo than Edward Norton, because I don't think that Edward Norton was able to give that softer side to Bruce, or would have been able to portray that softer side as well as Ruffalo has.
Which is interesting because he's been in Primal Fear, Fight Club, those types of movies where he has that edge to him. But I think in those other movies he did a better job with the gentler side, where you could believe that he had this full spectrum, and ironically with Hulk, not exactly. In terms of just as a movie, I enjoyed it. I was shocked that they put so many feelers out in the movie for other characters that could be developed for the Hulk that just haven't come to pass. They give a hint at the leader. They give a hint at... Well, not a hint. They have Doc Samson in the damn movie. How the hell do you not have a psychiatrist more in the fucking movie? I'm sorry.
Yes, absolutely.
But anyway,
this is what final thoughts are for. Just getting it out.
Yep.
But no, I mean, like I said, I enjoyed it for what it is. I don't necessarily rank the Marvel movies at this point. I'm just there for the ride. Just how they're going to go along with all these Avengers movies and stuff. But just disappointed that it seemed like they could have made it its own series of movies and they didn't do it. So that leaves a bitter taste in my mouth.
I would say I feel like this movie is a pretty solid, meh for me. Like not offensive, but doesn't... I don't get excited watching it like I get excited about the other Marvel movies. I feel like it is interesting as a therapist watching it, how they had those things in it that had credibility, like the heart rate watch, like the deep breathing, stuff like that. I just feel like it did... I don't know. I didn't feel like it was... It didn't feel as full as the other movies feel in terms of fleshed out like a full thing. And I think I am really attached to the Mark Ruffalo Bruce Banner and the kind of aw shucks and the kind of humor and the way he banters off the other ones. And so it felt like Edward Norton being kind of more of a harsher version of him, though I understand it maybe for the part of his journey he's on. It didn't make him he just wasn't as likable, which sounds, he doesn't have to be likable, but...
No, I think that's
I didn't glom to him like I've glommed to Ruffalo's version of him. Where I'm invested in their and I like Edward Norton, but I was just kind of like, I don't care as much as I care about when I watch the Bruce Banner and the other movies.
Yeah. I would say that with this one, I hadn't watched it since it came out. And I watched it again this week. And as I watched it, I still had my sort of like, this is like a 7, maybe opinion of it. But I found some more things in it to like about the way they presented him, and like the edginess that we're also critiquing, which the critiques are fair on, like his edginess versus having the softer side that Ruffalo does show. But I like the position where he's at. It was believable. His acting was believable for a guy that was like, I am willing to burn my life to protect everyone from me. And that being the central theme. And I really liked the take Anthony had on it about like it being set up like a horror movie until the end. He didn't become a superhero. Like I was always battled with that. Like, is the Hulk a superhero in the first place? Depends. When he jumps out of that airplane and he knows he may or may not turn into the Hulk because he knows that's the only thing that can stop Abomination, at that moment, he's a superhero. But the rest of this film, it's more of a monster movie, honestly, and I enjoyed it for what it was, about a man's struggle with his own anger and his own self. But as a film overall, I don't know, it's like a 7, I think.
So the movie was okay. I had never seen it before, which is why I watched it twice. Because so far with the ones that I haven't ever seen before, I have to watch it twice because I have a hard time remembering what happens. So, I'll probably never watch it again. It seems okay.
That's fair.
I think that I definitely felt something for Edward Norton as the Hulk in this movie, but I'm good. I like Mark Ruffalo. I like everything that they're doing with him, and I think the movie was kind of messy, and I don't know. Just, I'm not interested.
Ruffalo's like more secretive, and he just lets a little bit of the sadness out at times. Otherwise, he's kind of flat with it, but sometimes it comes out, and I like the way he does that.
He's the kind of broken that girls like.
Exactly. Let me put it this way. I want to hug Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk and just help him feel better. Edward Norton, I'm like, whatever. Figure it out.
Well, so we'll wrap it up because we have been here for a while doing both of our episodes. But you can find us at Popcorn Psychology at Facebook and Instagram, at popcorn_psych at Twitter. You can email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. Like we said at the front of the podcast, we are joined by Capes on the Couch today. And you can, if you want to plug your handles again.
Sure, absolutely. We're Capes on the Couch on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We have a Patreon page, patreon.com/Capes on the Couch. Doc and I also have our own individual Twitter accounts, Anthony Sytko, Sytko, and Doc Issues on Twitter. So you can follow us there for just, some more individual and personalized stuff. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for having us on. It's been an absolute blast, and we appreciated you guesting on our show, and we appreciate you guys returning the favor and letting us come talk The Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, it's been absolutely awesome.
Sure. Check out their episode of the Hulk that we're on, and this episode they're on, obviously. Thank you so much for spending the time today, and like both of us collaborating on it. It's very interesting getting more of the comic book background, because we don't touch upon that much in our movies. So thanks.
Oh, and our website is capesonthecouch.live. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. All the other stuff, completely forgot our website.
So we will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.